With the color case hardening done on both these rifles now, I'm going to move on to rust bluing and rust browning. The walnut stock is a rust brown finish on the rest of the metal parts, and the maple stock gets a rust blue. So basically they're getting the two most common finishes for muzzle loaders, rust blue and rust brown. Basically the process is the same. There really isn't a lot of difference in the way their application is done. The only thing that really separates rust blue from rust brown is kind of in the final stages when you boil your rust and turn it black, blue-black. That's the only real difference between a rust blue and a rust brown. Basically the idea is you're going to apply a chemical to these that'll change normal rust, iron oxide, into a ferric oxide. There's several different kinds of ferric oxide, but the idea is that what you're doing is you're rusting it to a certain point, then you're stabilizing that rust and making it a permanent coat of finish, and then that rust creates very, very tiny microscopic pores in the metal that allows the oil to penetrate and stay embedded right at the surface. That prevents it from rusting any further. So the process, like I said, is basically the same as far as how these finishes are applied, and I'm going to take you through the tools you need and the things you need to do this really good job of this, and then I'll kind of give you a quick overview of how I do it, and I'll throw in a few little tips that I've picked up over the years that'll hopefully help you get a good finish on your gun. So the tools you need is you need a good cleaner, brake cleaner or acetone or something like that. You know, after I'd polished these parts, I'd coated them in some rust preventative to keep them from rusting while I set them aside. And so you want to make sure you clean all that oil off of there. You don't want any oils on the metal. I use rubber gloves to prevent my oils from my hands from getting on the clean metal, but you can use a nice white cotton glove or something like that. It just has to be something that's clean and puts a barrier between your hands and the bare metal. Fingerprints and whatnot will leave trace oils from your hands, and I'll guarantee you they will ruin a finish quicker than anything. So you want to put a barrier between you and the metal you're working on. You'll need some carding wheels. This is stainless steel. It's very fine stainless steel wire on a carding wheel, and that's used for in between coats. You want to card off the loose rust on top. You're not trying to take that rust off of the metal, you're just trying to clean up the loose rust that forms. And so these are kind of dedicated. These are stainless steel. This one's a little Dremel tool, but I don't use it in my Dremel. I run it at slow speed in an air drill. And you can use an electric drill, an air drill, a drill press. Some guys like to mount their carding wheels in a drill press and then work their metal back and forth. I prefer to use mine in a drill and keep my metal stationary in my vise. So the big wheel I use for doing the large surface areas of the barrels and butt plates and stuff like that. The little one here I can get inside of trigger guard loops and stuff like that. So couple carding wheels. They're stainless steel and they're dedicated. I never use these for anything but carding. They never get used on any other metal surfaces. They never pick up any oils. They're completely clean and debris free. They're only ever used for just carding for the bluing process. The chemicals I use a combination of different stuff, depends on the type of finish I'm going for, but I'll give you my two favorites and then I'll give you some other stuff that I use. My favorite for a rust blue is Pilkington's American Rust Bluing Solution. It's one of my favorites. Gives you a really nice color, really nice and deep, and gets you a really nice depth of finish. For browning, this is R.E. Davis Rust Brown, Gunmetal Brown. This has been my go-to brown for years. I really like this product. The other one that I use sometimes, and it depends on what type of undercolor I want. For some English guns, you try to get a golden tone underneath and then a blue-black on top. It gives it a more depth and appearance. And so sometimes I'll use Mark Lee's Express Blue to get that undercoat going before I switch to Pilkington's to get the dark blue-black on top. So this will give you a little more of a golden tone if you don't do too many coats of it. But that's specific to a certain type of English finish and not what I'm going to be doing on these guns today. This is Laurel Mountain Forge Brown and Degreaser. I don't use it for browning at all, but it does have a handy purpose. Pilkingtons especially, and to some small degree R.E. Davis, will tend to bead up when you're applying it to the metal, and it'll give you little splotches in your finish. And the way I fix that and correct that and get it to lay down really smooth is I take a capful, just one little capful of this, and I pour it into a full bottle of my other bluing solution, either Pilkingtons or R.E. Davis. And I'm not exactly sure what component is in this, but I'm guessing it's probably part of the degreaser component, but it makes these other finishes go on really smooth. So just one little capful of Laurel Mountain Forge brown and degreaser into a full bottle of either of the other bluing products that I use, and it really makes it go down really smooth, makes for a real nice clean finish without any splotching or puddling in any place or streaking. The other thing that I use is most of these formulas, if you read the instructions that go with them, they talk about using a clothespin and a folded over cloth to put your finish on, or using something you know, like a cotton ball, not a cotton ball per se, but a cotton cloth, you know, to apply your finish in long smooth strokes. I don't use that. I've found that the best way to get a nice smooth even finish is a very, very soft bristled toothbrush. They work just great for getting a really smooth finish on. You use very little product with this, doing it this way, and you can get down into spaces down in around, like on your ramrod pipes. You can get down in under these spaces with the brush a lot easier than you can with a clothespin with a cloth in it or whatever. So really, really fine soft toothbrush really works good for that, for applying it. So basically the way this is done is you put your gloves on, you start with some cleaner of some kind, either acetone or brake cleaner or whatever you want to use that'll strip the oils off these, and you clean all these parts up with cleaner or degreaser of some kind and get them oil free, completely cleaned up to where you're down to stripped clean bare metal. And then the next step is to use your solution, and I never dip directly out of the bottle. I always pour into something else. I keep these little bottles of old vitamin bottles and stuff, and I pour a little bit into one of these, and then I dip my brush into there. That way I'm not contaminating my whole bottle with the brush. I'm only contaminating a little bit that I'm going to use. And you apply it in long smooth strokes, and it'll give you a little wet coat on there. Then you leave it and walk away. If you live in a place like I do, where the humidity runs pretty high most of the year, pretty much all year round, we have pretty high humidity even in the wintertime, I don't need a sweat box or anything. Just the high humidity will make these rust just being out in open air. Over the course of 3 or 4 hours, it'll film up and create a coat of rust on here. And then I can come back in with my carding wheels, card all the surface rust off, and apply another coat. And I'll keep applying coats to this, anywhere from 6 to 10 or 12 coats, depending on how deep I want the finish and what I'm going for looks. And it depends on how it's rusting too. That part of it's just something you kind of got to get a feel for. If you live in an area that doesn't have a high humidity like I do, then you might have to build a sweat box, and you can dig around online. There's different plans for different ways to build a sweat box, but basically it's a container that's long enough to house your metal parts. Mostly it's based on barrel length. You're going to build one that's longer than the longest barrel you're going to use, basically. It doesn't have to be real big. The dimensions can be fairly small. And then what you do is you put a heat source in there. A lot of guys use just a like 60 to 100 watt light bulb, and you put a little pan of water in the bottom, and you suspend all your parts in a sweat box, and close the door and make sure it seals up real nice. And that little bit of heat from the light bulb and the pan of water in the bottom will create enough humidity in a small space to get your rusting process going real good. So if you live in a dry area with low humidity, you can use a sweat box to do this. Like I said, I don't have that issue. I live in high humidity, so I can just do this out in the open air. So that's the gist of it. That's the materials I use, the chemicals I use, and a little quick tip there on how to smooth those chemicals up to make them work better. And so you can do it that way. Hopefully that'll help you with getting the chemicals to lay down a little smoother. Like I said, one of these is going to be rust blued, and the other one's going to be rust browned. But like I said, the application of it is the same. It's coat after coat after coat with carding in between each coat. until you get the depth of finish that you want. Now when you get done with the rust browning, you're not going to boil it in hot water to convert it to black. You're going to leave it brown, and what you're going to do is you're going to take some baking soda and water and make a nice little slurry out of it, and you'll neutralize your chemicals on the surface with that slurry, and then wash it all off really good so that everything's neutralized and then clean, and get all the baking soda and chemicals off of it, and so it stops the rusting process. And then you're just going to warm it up a little bit. I just use an electric hair dryer, warm it up a little bit, and apply the oil, and that finishes the rust browning process. For rust bluing, once you get it to the depth of rust that you want, and you've got a really good solid gray-orange color going, and everything looks like you want it to, then you're going to put it in a boiling tank and boil it until it turns black. You don't have to submerge them in water. Some guys just pour scalding hot water over them. Some guys put their barrels in a piece of PVC and just pour water into the barrel, into the PVC, and do the barrel that way. There's a lot of different ways you can convert it, but it basically just the heat and the water will convert it over to the heat from the water will convert it over to the other type of oxide that you want, and it'll turn it black when you do that, give you that black blue finish. If it doesn't, when you pull it out of the water, if it isn't as dark as you want and ready to go, then dry it off really good. Make sure you clean it and get all the water off of it really good, and then continue to rust it. You can continue the rusting process even after you boil it. Some guys boil in between each coat of rusting. They'll put a coat on, boil it, card it, put a coat on, boil it, card it, and do it that way. I don't usually do it that way. I usually do all of my coats over the course of a day or two and then boil it all at once. But either way works just fine, and like I said, you can continue the rusting process even after you boiled it, and get it to go darker each time. So if you don't get the finish you want when you pull it out of the water, then go ahead and keep going with these applications and carding in between until you get the finish you want. It's really not as hard as most people think. It really mostly just has to do with making sure that the metal is polished to the finish you want, that the metal is super clean, and that you don't contaminate your finish with oils from your hands or whatever. Make sure you put gloves on every time you're going to move it, work with it, apply a new coat, and do your carding and stuff. Make sure you've got gloves on so that you're not touching the metal with your hands. So I'll get started on this, and once I get these all cleaned up and everything, I'll show you a quick once through on the application with the toothbrush, and show you how it goes on, and hopefully the camera will pick up everything you want to see, so that it'll help you do a good job if you ever want to do this yourself. One last quick thing before I start doing the cleanup on these. You'll notice the barrels I've got put in my vise with a dowel running down the barrel, and then on the other end it's supported on a kick block over here on the other end of my bench. And what this allows me to do is, with it resting on the hooks like this and supported with the rod, I can just roll this barrel back and forth, and it gives me free access to everything. I can work on it, card it, whatever, and it's well supported, and I don't have to worry about it falling or hitting the floor or damaging it, and I don't have to handle it a whole bunch. I can rotate it back and forth just by using the hooks to kind of pick it up and move it, and that way I'm not having to touch my work any more than I absolutely have to. So I got all my parts clean. I got a little of my solution, my Pilkington's in here with that little, touch of Laurel Mountain Forge brown and degreaser in it. And all my parts are nice and clean. I got a new fresh pair of gloves on, and I got my brush right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush in here and kind of dab it inside the bottle just to take off any loose, any excess amount. And you don't really want to do this over the top of any of your other parts. You want to do it, kind of out in the open, because as the brush comes off, those whiskers will kind of flicker a little bit, and they'll cause a little overspray, and it can overspray onto your other parts and cause little splotches. So you don't want to do that. But what you want to do is, with a little solution on here, you want to start from one end and go clear to the other end in one clean, smooth stroke if you can. And it doesn't put much on there. I mean, it's probably not even enough for the camera to really see, but it's a very light solution, and it just goes on real smooth with the brush and the way I did that. You don't get any splotching or anything. You get one smooth coat of it on there, and then you can turn it over and do your other sections the same way. Obviously I'm holding this by parts that aren't going to be seen. They're going to be inside the stock, and so I'm kind of keeping the spots that are going to get touched away from the surfaces that you'll see when the gun's put together. But I do want to get some solution on all these parts and cover everything so that it blues the whole part, and that is basically just the way it's applied, and you do that with every part. You long smooth strokes, very small amount of solution, and keep it going on real smooth, and you'll get a nice even coat of rust building up. I'll set this aside on a clean cloth over here and let it rust, and it'll probably take about 3 or 4 hours to build that first coat of rust, and then I'll come back over and I'll put my carding wheel in my air drill and card that first coat off and put another coat on, same way, brush and real smooth strokes. This has only been a few minutes since I did that first piece and then went through and did all the rest of them, but you can see it's already starting to change color. It's kind of grayish, a little bit of orange in there. That's what you're looking for, is you want that nice coat of that to start forming up, and you can see it's kind of forming up on all these pieces here. That's what you're looking for. I'll leave that for about 3, maybe 4 hours. Kind of high humidity today, so it should happen fairly quickly. And in a couple hours I'll come back and check it, and if it's ready I'll card it off and apply another coat just the same way. So after a few hours you end up with a nice coat of rust on here, and so now I'm going to take my air drill and I'm just going to brush this loose surface rust off, and then I'll recoat it just like I did before. So all the parts were brushed off, as you saw, and then I recoated them, and you can see this coat's not even dry yet, but it's already darkening up a lot faster. So what happens is once you get that first etching going, the more coat you go, the deeper it gets and the faster it starts to happen. The action works a lot better, especially if the humidity's up like it is. So anyways, every couple hours I'll do this, and in the meantime, in between, I'll work on checkering stock. So while everything is rusting up and working on that bluing and browning stuff, I'm going to start doing some checkering. I thought since I hadn't shown off the maple stock very much during these videos, I'd use it for the checkering part of this tutorial and show you how I do it on this stock. This stock has really turned out very nice. It's got a lot of figure and character in it. You can see it's got some really nice quilting going on there, and if I kind of roll it through the light, you might be able to see the figure it's got going. So it's a really nice stock. It's turned out really nice. The finish really went down well on it. Really stained out well. So pretty happy with the way that's turned out. It's really pretty looking. So we're going to checker this section here on both sides, and I'm going to checker this section here on both sides. It's going to be a fairly simple pattern. You'll find on most of the guns from the 1800s, mid-1800s, which is, these are 1844 obviously, that most of those patterns were fairly simple. They weren't really complicated. There is going to be some slight variation here that I'm going to do. Most of the checkering that was done in the 1800s is what's called flat top checkering, and that's where the sidewalls are actually, the sidewalls of the cut into the wood are actually parallel. They're parallel cuts, and the type of checkering that we do nowadays actually has a V wall in it and raises to a point. So I'm not going to do actual flat top. What I'm going to do is what's called semi-flat top, and that's where it has a V cut, but it doesn't raise clear up to that point. It stops to where it's still flat on top, and so it looks similar to the original type of checkering, but it doesn't have those parallel sidewalls. It's got a V sidewall, so it's a little different. The other thing I'm going to do differently is the type of checkering that was typically done back then on English guns. When you look at the diamonds on an English gun, they're actually 1-to-1, and what I mean by that is they were, if they're an 1/8 of an inch wide, they're also an 1/8 of an inch tall. and that's basically a square, but it's turned at an angle so it looks like a diamond. And that's the type of checkering that was done back then. It was basically squares at an angle so that they looked like diamonds. Our more modern checkering is done longer than it is wide, typically 2.5 or 3 to 1. So for every width of 1 here, you'd go 2.5 or 3 in your length here. And it just looks a little nicer. It's a little nicer pattern, and it does look more like a diamond. So this isn't going to be a truly traditional checkering, but it is going to give a nice appearance, and it's going to be semi-flat top, so it will have that flat top appearance of an original gun, but the diamonds are going to be a 1 to longer ratio, and they're going to be V cut on the sidewalls instead of square cut, so a little different. The basic tools you need to checker. You don't have to have a checkering cradle like I've got this stock in, but it sure makes it nice and easy, and they're really not that hard to build. It's a couple of pieces of 2x4, routed a groove in it so I can slide the head up for different lengths, and then it's got a butt down here that swivels, allows me to swivel the stock around, and that's just a padded cup up there, just a little bit of padding in there, keeps it from damaging anything, and allows me to rotate the stock in about any position I want. And then mine has a swivel ball down here, and it allows me to position this whole thing, cradle, in just about any position I want. And so I can get my chair in nice and comfortable, get the right angle going, get it in the right position, and I'll be able to stay comfortable with it, and I'll be able to rotate the stock as I make my cuts with my tools. So a checkering cradle's nice, but like I said, it's not a requirement. You can do checkering in just any standard vise or any way that you can hold your stock comfortably and securely and allow you to use both hands to work your tools. Up at the top of my checkering cradle here is where I keep my checkering tools, and these are commercial tools. These are made by Gunline. You can make checkering tools if you want, making these heads and the handles and stuff. It's not hard to do. A lot of guys make them out of old files and use old files to make these. I find for my purposes these sets really aren't that expensive, and so I can buy the sets, and you really only need one set of handles, and then you just buy the different heads with the different spacings for cutters. There's several different types of these. These handles are straight handles, and then there's several different types of cutters. This is a straight feathering cutter, and then these are spacing cutters with different widths, and there's 2 sets of teeth in each of these, and they come in different widths, and that's how you establish the number of lines per inch in your checkering, like 16, 18, 20, 24, whatever, the width of these sets of teeth. And this is an offset handle here, and that allows you to kind of look as you're using it. It allows you to look past the handle and see where your cut's going. So anyways, a couple different ways to look at handles and cutters that these things do. The other thing that's helpful is to have a soft bristled brush, just a regular toothbrush, soft bristle, and that way you can, as you're cutting and you're making a little sawdust there, you can brush it off and get it out of the way. Just handy to have. This is a very flexible little ruler that I have. It came with my checkering tools. It's also got some layout gauges and stuff on it, and lines per inch of checkering. And these little flexible rulers are nice. They allow you to wrap around round surfaces and do layout lines and stuff. That's painter's tape, and the reason I use painter's tape is to establish my borders and edges. I can stick it on the stock. The tape isn't real aggressive, the adhesive on the back, so when I pull it up, it doesn't damage the stock finish any. And then for getting my lines, I use grease pencil. The reason I don't use like a standard number 2 pencil or anything like that is because lead pencils will scratch the surface of your finish. And so if your layout isn't right the first time and you pull your tape up and it looks kind of off or is a little weird, the pencil can actually scratch the finish, whereas a grease pencil like this, it won't scratch your finish. It'll just leave a little black streak, and if it's not right, you can just wipe it off with your hand or a little cloth, and it doesn't damage the finish underneath. So I do my layout with a grease pencil, and then once I know everything's right, I can follow along my lines with my tools. So I'll sit down, do the layout on this, and do my grease pencil marks, and then I'll start doing some cutting and show you how it's done. So hopefully the camera's picking this up okay, but there's the grease pencil mark, you can see, and it goes on up and around, follows the stock up, and it just comes to some real simple points. This isn't a real complex pattern I'm doing here. There's no fleur-de-lis or anything like that carved in the ends of this. These just come to simple points at each end, and they just follow straight lines basically. You can see just a real simple point. Try to keep the gaps even around the lock panels and stuff so that it looks nice and symmetrical. Try to keep your points coming out to the same spot in any place that both patterns come together. And then up here at the comb, I don't know if you'll be able to really see this well or not, but you can see I left just a real fine borderline gap there between the two lines. And the reason for that is on a really good wraparound pattern, I'd make this all tie in so that the checkering all ties together. But it's fairly difficult to do that. That's something you have to really be practiced at to do, to get your diamonds to tie together and come together on this wraparound. And since this isn't the checkering that's been paid for and decided on by the customer for this pattern, doesn't fall into that category. What I've done is I'll just do a real simple border here where they're nice, evenly spaced and nice symmetrical center line, and that'll keep me from having to tie my two checkering patterns together in a wraparound this way. It'll just put a little border right there between the two of them. But you can, if you're skilled and practiced, and I've done a few jobs like this where the patterns come together, where these lines line out parallel, so that when your diamonds come together, they all come together in a neat little pattern. You get a single row of diamonds right where the two joints meet. So it can be done that way, but this is a simpler way. This way you don't have to worry about where your patterns come out and make sure all your lines tie together, just leaving a border in there. But the points and everything on these, I try to keep them nice and symmetrical and even. The gaps are pretty close to symmetrical. Everything should look nice and even and symmetrical on this so that it all lays out into a nice pattern. So what I'll do is I'll start in with a single cutter, just a single tooth, and I'll border cut these, and I'm just going to do it real light to start with. I'll make these border cuts on both sides, and then I'll come in and I'll do my layout for my diamonds, my two primary lines that'll show me where my diamond pattern's going to lay out, and then I'll start cutting with the line spacer and just fill the whole pattern. It's not super complex to do this. It's just time consuming and patient, and you just have to be careful not to let your cutters slip and jump lines and stuff. You want to keep everything nice and neat and symmetrical. So all I'm doing here is taking that cutter and just following these border lines, and I'm just going along real slow, taking my time and trying to make sure I keep nice straight lines and come to nice even points where the lines intersect. And sometimes that requires pushing right to the corner, other times it requires back dragging. And I'm not going real deep with these. These are just for reference right at the minute. They're not an actual finished border line yet. It does take a little bit of pressure to cut through the finish. Once you get down into wood, it gets a little easier. One thing you do need to be aware of, especially with highly figured stocks like this, they're soft and hard spots in them, and so you'll be cutting along and everything will be going good, and then you'll hit a hard spot and it'll be kind of tough to cut through. You just got to be careful about that when you're pushing through these lines, that you don't slip off and stuff and make bad cuts because of those hard spots. You just got to really take your time, be patient, and make nice clean cuts. Once you have these lines established and you get your two primary lines for the checkering pattern established, then it becomes a little easier because the tool will follow the initial line that you've cut, and as you move over from spacer to spacer, that tool will keep following those same lines. So if you get your layout lines and your border lines cut in really nice and clean, the rest of it goes fairly well if you just take your time and be patient with it. I did was I used my template here, my 3-to-1 template, and did my layout lines on this. And you can see that with careful layout, you can get pretty close to parallel on every of your intersecting lines here, so that they match your diamond size, basically, your diamond layout. That way, at the borders and edges, your lines will run clean to the edge, and you'll have a clean diamond at the edge. It takes a little measuring and whatnot to get those layouts proper and get everything parallel, but if you get these lines parallel, your edge and borders will look pretty good. It doesn't always work out perfect, especially when you're doing carving and stuff, and doing fleur-de-lis and stuff, and adding that stuff in. You can't always get it to work out perfect, and that's not really important. As long as your diamonds in the overall pattern all come out even, it'll work out fine. But if you can lay everything out parallel, it ends up looking quite a bit cleaner when you're done. So anyway, so I used this, laid out a grease pencil line, and then came in and cut these. It's really important that you cut these lines really straight. These are the lines that establish the whole pattern, and so if these are crooked, your whole pattern will have those same crooked spots in it. So you really want these two lines to be as straight and clean as possible. That way when the rest of the pattern is filled in, it doesn't look wavy or anything being crooked from your primary lines here. So what I'm going to do is I'll take a parallel cutter, and this is a set of spacing cutter is what it is, and it's got two sets of teeth on it here that are spaced at the proper line per inch, whether it's 16, 18, 20, whatever. This is the tips of these cutters are spaced at that line spacing. So that's what this does, is this establishes the width of your parallels here. And so what you do is you put one set of teeth in your master line, and then just follow it along carefully. Take your time and do this patiently. This is the part where having a checkering cradle is nice, is because you can just keep rolling your stock over and stay on the most comfortable working surface this way. And I stop short. When I get close to a border, I stop a little short, and then I back drag to come from the edge of the border down into the pattern. Helps me to keep from having a lot of little nick overruns past the border line. So there we go, a first line cut in there. It gives me a nice parallel line, and then I'll deepen that out just a little bit and then move over to the next one. When I get the whole pattern cut in, then I'll come back in and cut everything to depth so that I get that nice even flat top with everything being a matched depth all the way down. So that's basically how it's done. It's going to take me a while, obviously. You got to fill this whole space in both directions to form the diamond, but that's how it's established, and that's how you get your nice checkering patterns. And it's just really a matter of patience and time and just practice. take any blank piece of hardwood, and I'll give you a little tip that it is much easier to do this on hardwood than it is to do it on softer woods like pine. Obviously the softer woods cut faster, but the softer woods also break out and chip out a lot easier than the hardwoods. And so if you're trying to really practice and get an idea of how it's going to be, you really need to work with similar hardwoods to what you're trying to checker, because it'll give you a better feel for the wood you're working with. But you can practice on scrap blanks, you know, round them over. Most of the stuff you're going to checker obviously isn't perfectly flat, so you want to, you know, practice on rounded over pieces so that you get a feel for how your cutters come across the round and the radius and stuff. So just practice on some blank pieces that are finished down to similar stock finishes, and once you feel comfortable with it, jump right into a stock. When I get these patterns you know, done up, I'll take a few more minutes and show you how they look when they're finished, and show you how you can clean up the borders and stuff. You're going to have a few little nicks and overruns. Unless you're a master checker, you do make a few mistakes, but you can come back in if your borders are real shallow like I first cut these. You can come back in and deepen those borders and clean up any overruns, as long as it doesn't go too far past the border. So I'll show you how to do that when I get this done, show you how to kind of clean up the edges and make them look real nice and clean at the border. So now that I've got the whole thing laid out, what I've started to do, and you can see where this section here looks a little different than this piece here, what I've started to do is deepen these. And when I'm doing it, I'm using that same tool, the same spacing tool, and I'm just cutting these down deeper and taking them down until these checkers on top just leave a small flat checker or diamond on the top. If you wanted to raise these to an actual checkering pattern, like a modern pattern, you just keep cutting down deeper until it raised it to a point. For this style to mimic, not exactly duplicate, but mimic, like I said earlier, this is going to look like an original flat top checkering. I'm going to leave them just a little flat on top, and that will give you the same appearance as flat top checkering, even though it's not parallel sided, it's angled sided. So it's called semi-flat top, as I mentioned earlier, but it'll give a similar appearance, and it'll look like the style and period of checkering. It's just a little easier to do is all. And so anyways, like I said, all I'm doing is I'm just following that same pattern that I'd already laid out, and I'm just deepening these cuts. And the only thing to remember here is to try and match the depth of cut to make all of your diamonds come out the same width and length, so that they all have the same look to them at the surface. And that's just done by carefully deepening these out until you have the same size look going. So really not too complicated. It just takes practice to do this with a steady hand and learn to be careful not to overrun or cross-cut into the other lines or anything like that. And like I said, it's just a practice deal. You just got to learn to do it and take your time. So as you can see, by saving the border for last, by just deepening the border out, I was able to clean up any overruns and little parts where I left a little nick beyond my border. So that's how I do this. So I got everything rusted up to the point where I want to convert it from that brown rust to a nice blue-black. And so what I've got here is I've got just a simple black iron tank, and it's full of water, and then I got a 3-burner stove under it, and just bringing it up to a boil right at the minute. I got my propane cranked up kind of high. You can see the flames kind of whiskering clear up over the edges. Once I get it boiling good, I'll turn the flame down and just keep it at a nice boil. But once this comes up to temperature, then I'm going to put my parts on some wires so that I can easily get them in and out of the tank, and I'll submerge them in here, let them boil for 10-15 minutes each, and when they come out, they should be a nice blue-black. If they're not, like I said, if they're not the color I want, or it doesn't look the way I want, then I'll cart it off and do it again and keep working on getting the color I want. So we'll see what we get when it comes out of the tank. So you can see the water is boiling now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slip the barrel down in here. Put a couple of clamps there on the side to hold my wire up, keep it from falling down in the water. Those wires just make it easy for me to get a hold of, get it in and out of there. Some guys like to cork their barrels and plug their flash channels. I don't usually worry about it. One of the things about it is when you pull it up out of the water, and it does dry rather rapidly because of the heat, you will get a little flash rust in the barrel sometimes, but that's really not a big deal. I'm going to clean it and oil it anyways, so it's going to, that flash rust is going to come right back out of there the minute I'm done. So I really don't worry about it. I just let it boil with the barrels open, and whatever water gets in there gets in there. If I've done my job right and the breeches are seated properly and everything, it's really no different than if you were cleaning your black powder up with water anyways. So just got to make sure it's cleaned and oiled afterwards, and not let that flash rust stay on the inside of the barrel after you're done. So I don't worry about corking them, but some guys do. Some guys cork their barrels and plug their flash channels, and that way they don't get any water down in the bore, but I don't worry about it. So I'll let this boil for a while. I'll probably go about 10 minutes this first time and pull it out of there and see what it looks like. And if I'm happy with it, then I'll move on to the smaller parts. If not, I'll clean it up, dry it off, and go back to working on getting a darker, deeper finish on it by applying more solution and more carding. Yeah, we'll pull it out of here and see what it looks like. Now, at first glance, it's not as dark and even as I want, so I think I'm going to go back to carding and keep going from there. For the small parts, like the butt plates and trigger guard and stuff like that, I just put them on a wire and submerge them. For the really small parts though, like the triggers and the screws and stuff, I put them in a little basket made out of screen and just leave them hanging in a basket. It seems to work pretty good. It's easy to fish them all back out that way. So what I did is I carded it and then coated it. And then once it was coated, I let it sit while I was boiling the other parts. And then before I carded it again, I went ahead and boiled it without carding the solution off. And then once I pulled it out of there and carded it off, you can see that it really evened up the finish and cleaned everything up, gave it a nice deep luster. And now, while it's still just a little warm, I'm going to go ahead and take a clean cloth with a little oil on it and oil it up. And hopefully the camera will catch this. You'll see how deep this finish gets once it's oiled up here. But you can kind of get an idea of how nice the finish looks on these if you do this right. And I just like to oil them while they're hot. I just think it makes the oils stay in the metal a little better, but I don't suppose it really matters. No evidence one way or the other that wetting them cool and then oiling them makes a difference. But as you can see, these parts really start to take on some depth and have a really nice lustered finish, rust blued like that. So that's basically your rust bluing process. Like I said, the only real difference with rust browning is you don't boil them. You leave them brown, and then you neutralize them with baking soda and water wash. Rinse that down real good, and then oil them up, and you get a nice rust brown doing this same process with the right chemicals. So if you use a good rust browning product, you'll get a nice rust brown. If you use a decent rust bluing product and take your time, clean them up, boil them, card them, and whatnot, do the process properly, you can get a really nice blue finish. That's pretty much going to wrap up the week. Next week I'll be doing the same thing basically to the other stock, and also doing the rust browning on the other metalwork, and hopefully these guns will be done here pretty soon. So, getting to the end of this project. Next week there probably won't be a video because, as I said, I'm basically just going to do the same thing again, and that'll be about the end of it.